The agreement. Emily Chen stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her laboratory, watching raindrops trace patterns down the glass while her father's voice echoed in her mind. Sometimes sacrifice is necessary for survival. The rare orchid beside her, delicate, resilient, and on the verge of extinction, seemed an apt metaphor for Chen botanical innovations, the research company her family had built over 3 generations. The board meeting starts in 20 minutes, Dr. Chen. Her assistant placed a folder beside her microscope. And Mr. Thorne has arrived early. Emily's fingers tightened around her coffee mug. Dominic Thorne, heir to Thorne Capital, and notorious for dismantling failing companies with surgical precision. Her father had assured her this merger was their only salvation, but the price was steep. Marriage to a man who viewed emotions as inefficient and relationships as transactions. "Send him in," she said, straightening her lab coat. "And please bring another coffee." Dominic entered with the confidence of someone who had never known failure. Tall, with sharp features and calculating hazel eyes, he moved through her laboratory without looking at the rare specimens that were her life's work. "The contracts are ready," he said, foregoing any greeting. "My legal team has included provisions for both company operations and our personal arrangement." Emily met his gaze steadily. "I've reviewed everything. 3 years of marriage, shared public appearances, separate private lives. After that, we reassess based on company performance." "Precisely." Dominic nodded, his expression revealing nothing. "Your research gets the funding it needs. My investment firm expands into biotechnology, and both our families maintain their legacies." "And if I refuse?" "Then Chen Botanical files for bankruptcy by month's end. Your father's heart condition worsens from stress, and 50 researchers lose their jobs." His tone wasn't cruel, merely factual. "Alternatively, you gain a silent partner who provides capital while you maintain research autonomy." The rain fell harder outside. Emily thought of her father in the hospital, of the breakthrough plant-based medicine they were so close to perfecting, of the families depending on her decision. "The wedding will be small," she said finally. "Just enough for appearances." Something flickered across Dominic's face, perhaps surprise at her directness. "Agreed, my penthouse has a separate guest suite. You'll have your privacy." 2 weeks later, Emily stood beside Dominic in a courthouse, exchanging vows without meeting his eyes. Her mother wept quietly, whether from joy or sorrow remained unclear. Emily's white dress felt too tight, the modest diamond on her finger too heavy. That evening, Dominic hosted a small reception at his penthouse, all glass and steel and expensive minimalism. As investors and board members congratulated them, his hand rested against her lower back, his smile practiced and convincing. "You're doing wonderfully," he murmured as they posed for photographs. "Just a few more hours." Later, when the guests had gone, Emily stood on the balcony overlooking the city. Dominic approached with 2 glasses of champagne. "To successful ventures," he said, offering her one. Emily accepted the glass. "And clear boundaries." "Of course." He loosened his tie. "The guest suite has been prepared. My housekeeper will arrive at 7. I typically leave by 6:30. "I'll be at the lab by 6, she replied. "The funding transfer will be completed tomorrow morning." Dominic checked his watch. "I have calls with Tokyo in an hour. Make yourself at home." As he walked away, Emily wondered if this hollow feeling would become her new normal. She had saved her father's company, secured jobs for her team, and all it cost was the possibility of ever knowing real love. In her new bedroom, surrounded by expensive furnishings selected by someone else, Emily removed her wedding ring and placed it in a small dish. For now, it was just jewelry, a prop in this elaborate performance they'd agreed to call a marriage. The catalyst. 3 months into their arrangement, Emily and Dominic had perfected the art of coexistence without connection. Their mornings consisted of brief exchanges about schedules over coffee, him reviewing market reports, her checking lab results, before departing in separate cars. Their evenings, when they overlapped at all, were exercises in polite distance. The penthouse remained immaculate, sterile, and devoid of personal touches despite Emily's residence. She had brought only a few plants, small bursts of life amidst Dominic's monochromatic design preferences. On a rainy Tuesday, Emily received an email from Dominic that disrupted their carefully orchestrated routine. My friend Julian Reyes will be staying with us for 2 weeks. He's photographing the botanical research for our investor presentation. Please accommodate him. No question, just an instruction. Typical Dominic. Julian arrived the next afternoon while Dominic was at a conference. Unlike her husband's sharp edges and crisp suits, Julian Reyes was all warm smiles and casual ease. His curly hair fell over his forehead as he extended his hand, camera bag slung across his shoulder. You must be Emily. Dom's told me absolutely nothing about you, which means you're probably fascinating. His laugh was genuine, his handshake firm. Despite herself, Emily smiled. And you must be Julian. Dominic mentioned you'd be documenting our research. Been friends since boarding school, though how he tolerates my creative chaos remains a mystery. Julian glanced around the austere penthouse. Speaking of which, this place is exactly as soulless as I imagined. Except, he moved toward a small potted plant near the window, for these little rebels. My quiet insurgents, Emily admitted. Dominic tolerates them as long as they don't compromise the aesthetic. Julian's eyes crinkled with amusement. I'd love to see where the real magic happens. Your laboratory. Dom says your research could revolutionize medicine. Emily blinked in surprise. Dominic had never shown interest in the details of her work. He said that? He mentioned breakthrough potential. For Dom, that's practically sonnets of praise. The next morning, Emily found Julian in the kitchen attempting to operate Dominic's complicated coffee machine. His frustrated expression made her laugh, her first genuine laugh in the penthouse. Here, she offered, reaching past him. It requires an engineering degree and the patience of a saint. Thank God. I was about to sacrifice something valuable to appease it. Julian leaned against the counter as she worked. So you're really a plant whisperer? Making medicines from flowers? Oversimplified, but essentially correct. Emily handed him coffee. Want to see? At the laboratory, Julian's genuine fascination with her work was refreshing. Where Dominic saw spreadsheets and profit margins, Julian saw stories. He photographed her rare specimens with reverence, listening intently as she explained each plant's properties. This orchid produces compounds that could treat certain types of dementia, she explained, gently touching a petal. Julian lowered his camera. My grandmother had Alzheimer's. That's incredible work you're doing. Days passed. Julian joined Emily for dinner when Dominic worked late, which was nearly always. They talked about his travels, her research, favorite books and films, conversations she'd never had with her husband. One evening, they sat on the balcony with wine long after sunset. Julian showed Emily his portfolio on his laptop. Breathtaking landscapes, intimate portraits, the beauty he found in ordinary moments. Why did you agree to it? Julian asked suddenly. The marriage. Dom told me the basics, the companies, the merger. But why you? Emily gazed at the city lights. My father's health, our researchers' jobs. Some choices are made with your head, not your heart. Julian's eyes held hers longer than necessary. And what does your heart say now? Before she could answer, the elevator chimed. Dominic stepped into the penthouse, pausing when he saw them together, something unreadable crossing his features. Working late? He asked, his tone carefully neutral. Just getting to know my best friend's mysterious wife, Julian answered with an easy smile. You never mentioned she was brilliant and makes excellent coffee. Dominic's eyes moved between them, lingering on Emily's relaxed posture, the wine, their evident comfort together. For the first time, she saw something beneath his composed exterior, uncertainty. Don't let me interrupt, he said finally, disappearing into his office. That night, Emily lay awake, troubled by the warmth she felt around Julian and the strange expression on Dominic's face when he'd seen them together. The awakening. Dominic Thorne had built his career on analysis, identifying patterns, predicting outcomes, managing variables. Yet he found himself unable to quantify the discomfort he felt watching Emily laugh at something Julian said over breakfast. I'm taking Emily to the botanical gardens today, Julian announced, pouring coffee. Need some natural settings for the presentation. Dominic looked up from his tablet. I didn't realize you required a full-day excursion for photographs. Emily raised an eyebrow. Is there a problem? No problem, Dominic replied, suddenly aware of how rarely he'd seen her smile in their shared home. The board meeting was moved up. I'll need the preliminary research results. They've been in your inbox since yesterday, Emily said, as requested. Julian glanced between them, then cleared his throat. I should get my equipment ready. When he left, an uncomfortable silence settled. Emily sipped her coffee, watching Dominic over the rim of her mug. Julian said you told him my research has breakthrough potential, she said finally. Dominic adjusted his cufflinks. The financials support that assessment. Is that all you see? Financials? The question lingered as Dominic straightened his tie. Enjoy the botanical gardens, he said instead of answering. Throughout his meetings that day, Dominic found himself distracted, an unprecedented occurrence. He checked his phone repeatedly, irrationally expecting messages from Emily that never came. By evening, he left the office early, telling himself he needed to review reports at home. The penthouse was empty when he arrived. On the kitchen counter sat a small potted plant with a note in Julian's handwriting. M said this one prefers indirect light, like the owner's office. Dominic stared at the plant. A peace lily. He recognized from Emily's descriptions, then carried it to his otherwise sterile office. Setting it near the window, he noticed a photograph Julian had left on his desk. Emily in the botanical gardens, sunlight filtering through leaves above her, laughing at something off camera. She looked radiant, unreserved, a version of his wife he'd never seen. Hours later, the elevator chimed. Voices filled with easy laughter preceded Emily and Julian into the penthouse. Dominic emerged from his office, surprising them both. You're home early, Emily noted, her smile fading slightly. Productive day? Dominic asked, eyes moving between them. Julian held up his camera. Got some amazing shots. Emily's a natural subject. He turned to Emily. I'm heading out with some old college friends tonight. You'll have to tell Dom about the carnivorous plants without me. After Julian left, Emily moved to the kitchen, Dominic following. You've never taken interest in my work before, she said, filling a glass with water. That's not entirely accurate. Dominic leaned against the counter. I review all the research reports. Reports, yes. Not the actual work. Emily met his gaze directly. Julian asked more questions in 2 days than you have in 3 months of marriage. The accusations stung with unexpected sharpness. Our arrangement wasn't predicated on personal interest. I know. Emily set down her glass. Thank you for the funding transfer for the new greenhouse equipment. Emily, Dominic said as she turned to leave, surprising himself with the urgency in his voice. Would you explain the carnivorous plants to me? She paused, studying him with confusion. Why? A question he couldn't fully answer himself. I'd like to understand what we're investing in beyond spreadsheets. Later that evening, reviewing Julian's photographs for the presentation, Dominic paused on one image, Emily examining a rare orchid, her focus complete, a small smile playing at her lips. Something twisted in his chest, recognition that she had never looked at him with such unguarded expression. That night, he heard Emily and Julian's voices on the balcony, their laughter carrying through the penthouse. Moving closer, he heard Emily's words clearly. This marriage is just business, Julian. There's nothing real about it. Sometimes I wonder what I'm doing with my life, pretending to be someone's wife when I'm really just a signature on a contract. Julian's response was too quiet to hear, but Dominic stepped back, an unfamiliar ache spreading through him as he realized he had everything he'd negotiated for, yet somehow still felt like he was losing. The confession. The investor presentation was 3 days away when Emily discovered Dominic in her home office, reviewing her research notes spread across the desk. He looked up, startled by her presence, like a trespasser caught in the act. What are you doing? She asked, setting down her bag. Dominic straightened papers unnecessarily, preparing for questions the board might ask. Your work on the Nepenthes hybrid is impressive. You could have asked me directly, Emily said, trying to hide her surprise at his interest. Would you have explained it to me the way you explain it to Julian? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither had acknowledged. Emily studied her husband, the slight dishevelment of his usually perfect hair, the loosened tie, the uncertainty in his eyes. Julian asks because he's genuinely interested. She answered carefully. And you believe I'm not? In 3 months, you've never once visited my laboratory. You refer to my rare specimens as the plant assets. What should I believe? Dominic's expression tightened. I've been reviewing everything, your research journals, methodology, projected applications. Your work could change medicine as we know it, he paused. I should have recognized that sooner. Emily leaned against the doorframe. Why now? Before he could answer, the elevator chimed, announcing Julian's return. The moment dissolved as Julian appeared carrying takeout bags. Hope everyone likes Thai food? He called, then stopped, sensing the tension. Bad timing? Perfect timing, Emily said, moving past Dominic. I'm starving. Dinner proceeded with Julian filling silences, though Emily noticed Dominic watching her with an intensity she'd never experienced from him. When Julian excused himself to make calls, Dominic finally spoke. I heard you on the balcony last night, he admitted. Telling Julian this marriage isn't real. Emily set down her fork. We agreed it was business. Yes, Dominic's voice softened. But I'm beginning to question our initial terms. Meaning what exactly? I'd like to attend the greenhouse opening tomorrow, he said, instead of answering directly. If that's acceptable. Emily stared at him, confused by this sudden shift. It's just a small ceremony for the research team. I know. I'd still like to be there. The next day, Emily was explaining the new climate control system to her researchers when Dominic arrived. Not in his usual business attire, but dressed casually in a simple button-down and jeans she'd never seen him wear. He stood at the back, listening intently as she outlined their upcoming projects. Afterwards, he approached with genuine interest as she showed him the rare specimens that would thrive in the new environment. This is the orchid that produces compounds for dementia treatment? He asked, recognizing it from her notes. Emily nodded, surprised. Yes, how did you know? I've been studying your research every night this week. His admission came quietly. I should have done it months ago. That evening, when Julian suggested they all go to dinner, Dominic declined. You two go ahead. I have calls. But later, Emily found him on the balcony instead, staring at the city lights. She joined him, maintaining careful distance. Why aren't you with Julian? He asked without looking at her. He's meeting photography contacts. Emily studied Dominic's profile. What's happening, Dominic? This sudden interest in my work, in attending functions, what changed? He turned to face her fully. I realized I've been a fool. His voice held an unfamiliar vulnerability. Watching you with Julian, seeing how you light up around him, I recognized what I've denied myself by treating our marriage as merely transactional. We both agreed to those terms, Emily reminded him, and now I'm asking if we can renegotiate. Dominic stepped closer. I want to know you, Emily, not as a business partner, but as the woman who fills notebooks with observations about plants most people would overlook. Who makes coffee at precisely 5:45 every morning? Who hums classical music when she thinks no one is listening? Emily's breath caught. You've noticed those things? I've noticed everything, he confessed. I just didn't know how to acknowledge that I was feeling things I didn't anticipate. Before she could respond, Julian appeared at the balcony door. Sorry to interrupt, he said, his gaze lingering on their proximity. Emily, could I borrow you? I need your expertise on labeling these photos. As Emily followed Julian inside, she glanced back to see Dominic watching her with an expression that, for once, he made no attempt to disguise. Later that night, Emily found Dominic in his office, the peace lily she'd given him now prominently displayed on his desk. Julian's leaving tomorrow, she said from the doorway. Dominic nodded without looking up. I know. He asked me to go with him, Emily said quietly. Just for the weekend, to a photography exhibition in Monterey. Now Dominic met her eyes, his expression unreadable. And what did you tell him? That I needed to think about it. Is that what you want? To go with him? Emily stepped into the office. A week ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Now, I'm not so certain. She moved closer to his desk. You said you wanted to renegotiate our terms. What exactly are you proposing, Dominic? The bloom, the morning of the investor presentation, arrived with unexpected clarity. Emily stood before the mirror, fastening diamond earrings Dominic had left outside her door with a note. For luck today. These belong to my grandmother, who also changed the world in her own way. Julian knocked gently on her door frame. Ready for the big day, superstar? She smiled at him in the reflection. Almost. Did you finish the presentation slides? All done? Julian leaned against the wall. You know, I've been watching you two this week. Me and Dominic? Something's different. He studied her expression. When I first arrived, you were roommates with paperwork. Now there's... I don't know. Gravity. Emily turned to face him. I never properly thanked you. For what? Making me remember what it feels like to be seen. She approached, kissing his cheek. And for showing Dominic what he was missing. Julian smiled knowingly. That was never my intention, but I'm not sorry it happened. He squeezed her hand. For what it's worth, the way he looks at you when you're not watching, that's not business. Emily, that's the real thing. The presentation hall buzzed with investors and pharmaceutical representatives. Emily stood backstage, reviewing her notes one final time when Dominic appeared beside her. The board chairman just arrived, he said, adjusting his tie nervously, a gesture she'd never seen from him before. Are you ready? Emily nodded, surprised when he took her hand. There's something I need to tell you, he said, his voice low. I've been reorganizing the company structure. Emily tensed. What does that mean? It means regardless of today's outcome, your research is secure. I've created an independent endowment that guarantees funding for 5 years minimum. He met her eyes. Your work is too important to be subject to quarterly profits. Why would you do that? It defies every business principle you've ever followed. Dominic's thumb traced circles on her palm. Because some things matter more than business. He hesitated. I realized I don't want a wife who stays out of obligation or contract. If you choose to remain, I want it to be because you want to build something real with me. Before she could respond, they were called to the stage. Emily moved through her presentation with passion and precision, explaining how their plant-derived compounds could transform treatment for degenerative diseases. Throughout, she felt Dominic's gaze, unwavering and full of something she'd never seen before. Pride. When investors asked technical questions, Dominic deferred to her expertise instead of answering himself. When a pharmaceutical executive suggested their timeline was ambitious for a small research team, Dominic stepped forward. Dr. Chen's breakthrough methods have consistently outpaced industry standards, he said firmly. I'd suggest reviewing her published papers before questioning her timeline. Emily glanced at him in surprise, watching this new version of her husband defend her work with genuine conviction. As the presentation concluded successfully, Emily spotted Julian in the audience. Camera lowered, a knowing smile on his face. He nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. At the reception afterward, Emily circulated among investors, fielding questions and accepting congratulations. When she finally had a moment alone, she stepped onto a quiet terrace for fresh air. Dominic followed, carrying 2 champagne flutes. You were extraordinary today. We were, she corrected, accepting the glass. I never expected you to defend my research that way. I've been blind to a lot of things, he admitted, including how much I've grown to admire you. Emily studied him in the soft evening light. Julian's leaving tomorrow, taking an assignment in Japan. Dominic nodded slowly. And you? Have you decided? She set down her champagne, moving closer. When I agreed to this marriage, I thought I was sacrificing my chance at love for security. I never imagined that we might find something genuine anyway. Dominic completed her thought. Exactly. Emily reached for his hand. I'd like to stay, Dominic, not because of contracts or obligations, but because I want to discover what we could be without those constraints. Dominic's free hand came up to touch her cheek with a gentleness that still surprised her. I've spent my life believing emotions were inefficient, he confessed. Then I watched another man making my wife smile, and suddenly spreadsheets seemed meaningless compared to the possibility of losing you. Emily leaned into his touch. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm grateful for our business arrangement. Without it, we never would have found our way here. As the city lights began to illuminate around them, Dominic drew her closer. I may have approached our marriage like a business deal, he whispered against her hair. But loving you is the most illogical, necessary thing I've ever done. When his lips finally met hers, Emily felt the last walls between them dissolving. It wasn't the passionate beginning she'd once dreamed of, but something more profound, a connection built slowly through observation, understanding, and the courage to rewrite terms once thought immutable. Inside the reception, Julian captured one final photograph. Emily and Dominic on the terrace, silhouetted against the twilight. No longer two separate individuals maintaining professional distance, but a single connected shape against the gathering darkness. Later that night, as Emily moved her belongings into their now-shared bedroom, she found a small rare plant on the nightstand. One she'd mentioned was nearly impossible to cultivate outside specialized conditions. How did you find this? She asked, touching its delicate leaves with wonder. Dominic smiled, taking her hand. I have my methods. Besides, the botanical garden curator was quite impressed by my wife's research. You went back there? When? The day after I heard you tell Julian our marriage wasn't real. He drew her close. I wanted to understand what makes your eyes light up the way they do when you talk about your plants. Emily reached up to trace his features, no longer the face of a business partner, but of a man she was genuinely beginning to love. Some specimens, she murmured. Just need the right conditions to flourish. Dominic's arms tightened around her. And some arrangements, he replied, that begin as transactions can grow into something far more valuable. Outside their window, the city continued its rhythm, indifferent to the small miracle occurring within the once sterile penthouse, the careful, tentative bloom of love where only business had been planted.